I've been telling about all the things that my grandfather was involved in. Haven't said very much about his principal occupation. His real occupation was a doctor. He took care of a whole lot of people in Covina for years after I was started practicing law. I had clients come in that would introduce themselves as one of JD's babies. He attended the birth of a whole lot of children in the Covina area. He practiced with a Dr. Jennings. The two of them had an office together, and in the Covina Argus newspaper, they had a ad almost every week. It was a weekly paper, which would say Reed and Jennings, physicians and surgeons. J.D. Reed, 8 to 10 a.m., Jennings 10 to 12, Reed 2 to 4 p.m., and then again 7 to 8 p.m. Phone 153. Offices and residence, first home west of the M.E. parsonage. But at the time, there was no hospital in Covina. That's the 1890s, 1910, up to about 1922. No hospital in Covina. So if you were really sick, you just stayed home where there was somebody to take care of you. So after Grandpa would finish his office hours and have dinner, he'd then go out on the back porch and clap his hands a couple times and whistle, and his horse, Old Dandy, would take himself out of the stall, back in between the whipples of the buggy, ready to be harnessed up. Grandpa would harness him and then go make his calls to the people who were really sick, who had to stay home. And sometimes this went very late into the evening. Very often going home, Grandpa would fall asleep. And Old Dandy knew the way home. In an obituary that was written by Marietta Broadwell for the newspaper, she put it very nicely in saying that farmers astir for their early morning chores often saw him go by in his buggy, sound asleep, head sunk in his chest, the reins hanging loosely in his hands, while the faithful horse Dandy slowly jogged home undirected. A lot better even than cruise control finds its way home. A lot of people have heard that story, but not very many have heard about something that my father told me. Must have been about 1909 or 1910. Dad graduated from Covina High School in 1909, and he, on one or two occasions, probably more than that, he asked Grandpa if he could borrow Old Dandy and the buggy to go visit Edith. Edith Waterhouse, who later became my mother, lived on San Bernardino Road at Orange, so it's some distance from downtown Covina. And Grandpa says sure he could use the horse and buggy. But one night, Grandpa was using the buggy and he fell asleep, and when the horse stopped, he was not in his own barnyard in Covina, but in the Waterhouse family barnyard where Dad had been going occasionally. Grandpa was a little bit surprised, but not, he knew where he was. Things were okay with him. Finally, Covina did get a hospital. The Whitler sisters, at the urging of Grandpa, started a hospital. First it was in Mr. Bisbee's former home, big two-story house on the corner of 2nd and Badilla Street, where the parking lot for the Wells Fargo Bank is today. And they had there I think it was a 7-room or 7-bed hospital, and a small surgery, and that soon became apparent was not large enough, and the sisters, Whitler sisters, who was at along with Lavinia Graham, Melissa Whitler, and can't remember her sister's name, started the hospital, built a new hospital at the corner of 4th and College Street in Covina, where the Intercommunity Hospital is today. Later, in 1947, the Whitler Sisters Hospital was sold to the Intercommunity Hospital Corporation. And at that time, Lavinia said, later it was Dr. J.D. Reed who took a particular interest in our undertaking. The sisters recalled, we used to tell him that he was our pilot, and he gave us a great deal of help and advice. He was planning to retire himself, but he said he wanted the hospital kept alive for the benefit of the younger doctors who were coming along. Dr. Reed selected the site on which the first one-story wing of the present hospital building was erected in 1924. So Grandpa got involved in a whole lot of things, but I may have given the impression that he was the only person in Covina who was doing anything. Actually, it was a small town, and if something needed to be done, there was a group of people, men, who would make sure that it got done. Grandpa was one of them, but there were others, the Elliots, Kirchhoff, Hodges, Kuhlman. These guys did a whole lot of things outside of their own business to make sure that Covina was a good and progressive town. At one time they said that Covina had more automobiles per capita than any city in the United States. So it was a up-and-coming active city. I mentioned Mr. Kuhlman. This is his building, Covina Land and Water Company, the Kuhlman building. It was down at the end of 2nd Street at Front, right across from where the Southern Pacific Railroad station was. But there were a lot of really active people in Covina, not just Grandpa. There were some tragedies in the Covina family of the Reeds. On Christmas Eve of 1915, Grandpa's wife, Eva Clark Reed, passed away after a long and painful illness. It hurt him greatly, but he carried on, and let's see, in 1922 he remarried to a lady who had been his nurse, Emma Hugg, and they had one more child. They had their first child, Wallace Reed, was born in 1889. He became a doctor, served in the army during the First World War, although he went over to France, but fortunately the fighting was over before he got there. His second son was my father, Thomas B. Reed, who was an attorney. Wallace had been educated at USC, and Dad went to Cal, so they had a little bit of rivalry there. But Dad took his, he didn't have a bar exam then, but he became an attorney in 1917. And just very shortly after that, the gentleman who was Justice of the Peace for the area, Daley Stafford, got a commission in the Army, and he retired as Justice of the Peace. And Dad was appointed as Justice of the Peace of Covina just a year or so after he started practicing law. And he continued as a judge in Covina. He was police judge in West Covina. He sat on assignment in the Los Angeles Municipal Court. He was the first judge of the Citrus Court, although it was called the Ramona Court when it first opened. Then some 17 years later, Grandpa and his first wife Eva had another son, Jim Reed. He went to UCLA, got his business degree there, but he ended up being the family rancher. Grandpa had a 40-acre ranch on Citrus between Cortez and Cameron, which Jim took care of, as well as another 20 acres that Dad and Jim owned at Hollenbeck and Garvey before it was a freeway. But and Jim was a real good rancher. He was known as one of the better ones in the valley. Finally, the orange groves died out or came out, largely because of a disease called quick decline that would just decimate a whole orchard. All the trees would actually die in just about 2 years. That took care of a lot of orchards. If they'd been budded on sour root stock, it didn't affect them, but on sweet root stock, the orange trees could die from this. But at the time they started dying, the quick decline struck, was about the time that the Second World War was over, and a whole lot of the veterans who had been in California or passing through during the war decided that as long as they were starting up their life after the war, they'd go to California. And so there was a demand for property at the time, and the old orange growers found a way to make some money, a lot more than from raising oranges, by selling off their old orange groves. So orange groves died away. Jim then went to work in the Covina National Bank that was still owned by, Grandpa was the president and a major owner. There are many other stockholders too. During the Second World War, when there were not enough farm workers, all of them having been drafted, Jim got some of his younger nephews, myself and my cousin Bob, and also my cousin Dorothy, to help in the orange orchard. And the job that I remember most was we worked as a spray crew on a Model T Ford that had a 400-gallon water tank on it and a tower, 2 spray guns behind and 1 in the tower. We would drive through the orchard spraying for red spider and scale. The spray was just water with a little oil in it. Oil would coat the pests and destroy them. Nothing toxic about it at all. Remember driving along through the orchard. I was up in the tower, and my cousin was a little younger than I, was driving along with the car or the truck in under compound gear at about a mile an hour. And sometimes he wouldn't start up when I told him to, or stop when he needed to, because he'd go asleep because we were driving so slow. So I could take the spray gun and just swing it across, give him a good wet down to wake him up. Another family tragedy occurred in October 10th, 1920, when my father's grandparents, his mother's parents came out from Missouri to visit the Reeds in Covina, and Grandpa Clark and his wife and 3 other younger relatives went for a Sunday drive, went up to Glendora, and at the intersection of Grand and Foothill Boulevard, where the Santa Fe railroad tracks cross diagonally through the intersection and still do, their car was hit by the Santa Fe train going at a fairly high rate of speed. Or maybe the great grandpa hit the train, I don't know, but in any event, all 5 of them were killed. And that was a great tragedy. That had one other effect too. There was some litigation afterwards because inheritance would depend upon who died first. At the time, California didn't yet have the law that said that if people died in a common accident or tragedy, it didn't matter who died first. It was assumed that they all died at the same time. And one other tragedy occurred to the family in 1931, I believe it was. Dad's older brother, Wallace Reed, the doctor, who had an office in Covina at the corner of College and 4th Street, right across from the hospital building, was just torn down 2 years ago, and they built a new clinic there. Very nice building. But the one morning, very early in the morning, he was found in his car in Baldwin Park, having apparently just bumped into a telephone pole, and he was, while he was still breathing, he died before any help could get to him. He had a bruise on his forehead, probably from, or it could have been from hitting the windshield when the car hit the pole. Didn't hit the pole very hard. There was no damage really to the car or to the pole. The front driver's side window was broken, and he had a stab wound in his side, through his coat, through his shirt. It was not the cause of death, but probably he died from the blow to his head. But the strange thing was that the glass from the front window was not at the scene of this accident, but in the parking lot of his office. So my father suspected foul play, and I know later he hired a man to investigate, but there wasn't any determination as to what really happened. I didn't realize till much later how lucky I was to be a member of this family that was as supporting and helpful and caring as our family was. Every Thanksgiving Day we'd have dinner at Mary Reed's and touch football game afterwards. Every Christmas Day we'd have Christmas at Grandpa Reed's and a touch football game afterwards. We were a very lucky family in a wonderful little town. Been nice to tell you about this, and I hope that get a chance to talk to you some more sometime. That about enough?